Life's a cruel mistress, ain't she? One day you're the big dog, the high pillow, the top aloof in this cesspool of a city. Cracking cases left and right, slugging goons and thugs in their ugly mugs. Laying down the law to every hoodlum and grifter and con man. Really making those coppers and bulls in the hoosh-cow earn their cabbage. Then the next you slip up. You give some working stiff a dirty look, or you pinch a pasty. It doesn't matter. You just pissed off the wrong guy. All of a sudden, you go from a head honcho dick to some low-life beluga. Not even worthy of low-life scum. And if that don't top it, every Tom and Susan is coming out of the woodwork, and even your own joint ain't safe. You got Bun Man and Dropper coming out of the woods out, trying to 86 you. So how did a bum like me get into a doozy like this? Heh. If I had known what trouble was gonna deliver on my doorstep, I would've just kept my nose clean.
Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, Columbo, Encyclopedia Brown, Veronica Mars, Snoopy in a hat, but a very specific hat. The greatest minds to ever grace the page and screen. Them, alongside many others, are responsible for solving some of the greatest mysteries known to mankind. There's nothing like a good old-fashioned whodunit, and when it comes to animation, well, there's no shortage of good mystery episodes. With the winds of Halloween around us, depending on whenever this releases, hopefully on Halloween, we'll see. Now seems like the perfect time to look over some of said episodes. I picked out 13 examples, just what I could think of off the top of my head. Some good, some great, some not as good, you know how it is. Not all of them involve a murder, mind you, but as long as there's a crime, a mystery, an investigation, a culprit or more, and possibly someone leading the investigation, then it's fair game. Obviously there's more than just like 13 of these, it just seemed like a mysterious amount, so if you enjoyed this and want to see more in the future, let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, why don't you like the video, subscribe if you're not. You know, it all helps out the channel. Anyways, let's get sleuthing. When it comes to animated whodunit mysteries, there is no example that is quite as popular or culturally significant as The Simpsons' Who Shot Mr. Burns two-parter.
Next Sunday, Mr. Burns is shot.
Taking cues from the Dallas special event that followed the same naming convention, we follow the thrilling mystery behind the gun person who shot down the much maligned multi-billionaire nuclear tycoon Mr. Burns. The only problem is that nearly every person in town is a suspect, including the entire Simpson family, nightclub owner Mo Sislak, liquor connoisseur Barney Gumble, dedicated educator Principal Seymour Skinner, grounds tender groundskeeper Willie, and possibly even a celebrity guest, like that jazz teacher that got laid off. You know, Mr. Samba? Senor Mambo? What was it?
Tito Puente?
Yeah.
Well, he did vow revenge. But I can't see him doing something illegal. He's in show business. He's a celebrity.
Let's roll, boys.
This two-parter is set up where the first part focuses on setting up motives for all the characters of Springfield, with the final minutes actually involving the crime, and the second part revolving around the investigation behind the crime, as well as the ultimate reveal behind the true culprit. On paper, it might seem redundant to have a whole episode setting up why the people of Springfield would want to kill Mr. Burns, given that by this point we've had 6 whole seasons to showcase exactly why in numerous episodes. But I think it was definitely necessary to establish some definitive motives for many Springfield residents. Most importantly, that of Burns' right-hand lackey, Waylon Smithers, who is a definite highlight of this special, as it's one of the only times he puts his foot down against his boss's wishes and speaks out against him.
There has been a shocking decline in the quality and quantity of your toadying, Waylon, and you will fall into line, now!
No, Monty, I won't. Not until you step back from the brink of insanity.
It dips into how far Smithers can be dragged along with the plan, and shows a more human side of him, especially in the second part, where he's the prime suspect for the first half of the episode. Another complaint I see thrown against the first part is that with Mr. Burns' plan to block out the sun, this is sort of a transition of the character from an antagonistic force to a cartoon villain.
Bah! He was a rank amateur compared to Dr. Colossus.
Personally, I don't necessarily think this idea is so out of left field for a character who has a trapdoor in his office all the time, but again, I can kinda see where a lot of the criticisms are coming from. I think that where part 1 of the special really is the atmosphere of tension that it sets up once the plot gets rolling. There are some shots here that are surprisingly chilling, and the dialogue between the characters somehow manages to be equally tactful and tongue-in-cheek with what they're trying to pull off.
That's odd. Mr. Smithers left his jacket behind.
Whoa, that's odd. Principal Skinner left his mother behind.
Part 2 is where things really start to take off. They waste almost no time referencing other mysterious show plot lines, such as Dallas's shower scene and the dream sequence from Twin Peaks. The first half focusing on the downward spiral of Smithers is definitely the highlight for me, since we see the man whose primary character trait was ripped away from him cope with the possibility of shooting the man that he worshipped. Once that's wrapped up, however, I feel like the special sort of takes a tumble in regards to the quality and mystery aspect, and I feel like now's the appropriate time to air out my main grief with the special as a whole. This 2-part episode feels less like a big event in the world of The Simpsons, and more like a publicity stunt in the real world, and based on some DVD commentary, it sounds like I'm not far off. Thank you, We're Simpsons DVD box.
I call it bold and bright.
More like belongs in the trash.
Well, I couldn't possibly solve this mystery. Can you?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. I mean, you know, it's my job, right?
Because of the nature of this 2-parter being a season finale and a season premiere, there was a lot of hype surrounding how the mystery played out, and it's clear that Matt Groening and the writers did this to involve real-world aspects between the 2 parts. Given the almost 4 months between the 2 episodes, a lot went down, including an official contest where the person who guessed the culprit correctly would win a prize, the Mirage Casino in Las Vegas actually taking wagers as to who the culprit was, and even a half-hour special presentation of America's Most Wanted. Oh, sorry, I mean Springfield's Most Wanted, that aired just before the second part premiered, focused around the mystery behind who shot Mr. Burns.
We know there are numerous suspects. So far, on Springfield's Most Wanted, we haven't captured any of them.
It could be seen as nothing more than an overglorified clip show and free advert for the show, but there's a certain charm behind this being taken as seriously as it is. It's really cool for this to be treated like such a big event, something that everyone was talking about at the water coolers, but I wish the execution behind the mystery was handled a little better. After a whole summer of suspense, we finally learned the true assailant. So, who really shot Mr. Burns?
Tonight we're gonna find out who shot Mr. Burns. What? 15 years ago? Who was it? Really? The baby? I want a baby.
Having Maggie Simpson be the shooter makes sense for a show like The Simpsons, since it's an easy way to dispose of this whole ordeal in favor of keeping the status quo intact. But at the same time, I'd be lying if I said this didn't feel like they were too afraid to take a big leap of faith and actually write off one or more characters. Though, I know for a fact that a lot of time and effort went into making this climax as mysterious as possible. While my viewpoint of the special as a whole has diminishing returns, I find myself getting more entranced in the circumstances surrounding the special. Like apparently, with that contest that I mentioned earlier, someone actually guessed correctly, but due to the fact that they guessed via an online forum, neither Josh Weinstein nor Bill Oakley, the lead writers behind the episode, were ever able to get in contact with the person to give them their special prize. Alongside that, the making of the special sounds like something that was one of a kind, albeit something that sounds like an absolute nightmare production-wise. While producing the second part, many staff members were left in the dark as to the true culprit. Table reads ended before the third act, and animation for the ending of the show didn't start until the end of summer, which was about a month before the episode was set to air on Fox. There was also several alternate endings produced to keep the staff in the air as to the true culprit, many of which were slightly shown off in the Simpsons 138th episode Spectacular, including a full alternate ending in which Mr. Smithers was the true culprit. I feel like this could have been a good twist, but seeing how it ended with the only ramification being a 5% pay cut, if they had to stick to the status quo, I'm glad they went with the baby being the culprit. Upon researching for this video, I actually found out that apparently Barney Gumble was pitched as the assailant, and the second part would have ended with him being sent to prison. I'm unsure as to why this was rejected, but I feel like this could have been a cool way to go, as it would have shaken up the status quo, but not in an earth-shattering way that makes everything different from here on out.
Oh, Barney, leave me alone. Oops! Uh-oh!
As it is, Who Shot Mr. Burns is a fine enough mystery that revels in its setup, but it doesn't really pull the trigger when it comes to execution. It's a fun time, but for all its initial build-up, don't expect too much of a payoff.
Well, I think it's good for a show to go off the air before it becomes stale and repetitive.
Maggie shot Mr. Burns again.
What to do today? What to do? What to do?
Garfield's Babes and Bullets, one of several standalone Garfield TV specials from Film Roman. These were a dime a dozen in the 80s. You'd always see these CBS special presentation bumpers, you know, dung 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 dung, ba 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 ba, and then boom, 9 out of 10 times it's Garfield.
My life's full of babes and bullets. No time to lay back and cool it.
This is an entirely self-contained special, where we follow Garfield, who upon coming across a hat and trench coat, imagines himself as a private investigator. The rest of the special plays out with Garfield trying to solve the case of a dead Professor O'Tabby, who had driven off a cliffside late one night. The cops believe that he just fell asleep at the wheel, but when a newly widowed Tanya O'Tabby believes that her husband was actually murdered, it's up to Garfield to figure out the truth behind this mystery. Right off the bat, you could probably notice a few things just by staring at the screen. For starters, the whole special, minus the beginning and ending, are all in black and white, harkening back to older film noirs, such as the Maltese Falcon. Speaking of, the similarities don't stop there, as Garfield takes on a pseudonym inspired by the Maltese Falcon's main character, Sam Spade. Albeit Garfield's surname is actually spelled differently. It's actually Sam Spade, S-P-A-Y-E-D. A clever and somewhat adult play on the name. That's another thing worth noting too. Garfield's always been known for his witty remarks and cynical attitude that can sometimes lean into the more macabre aspects of our day-to-day lives, all while being wrapped in this somewhat cutesy marketable facade that can easily be aimed at children. But with Babes and Bullets, it feels like this special was written with adults in the forefront.
Are you Spade?
I never know how to answer that question.
Not just with the humor, I honestly think that given the tone that the special is trying to accomplish, it sort of ostracizes a lot of the general viewers of Garfield media. Granted, I don't actually think that's necessarily a bad thing here, because they achieve the film noir style in spades. Pun entirely intended. So much of the special is taken up by Garfield's inner monologue, which is weird when looking at this as a Garfield special, since the character works best playing off the weaknesses of others. But if you're looking at this as sort of a noir detective story, then they really hit the nail on the head, as a lot of the dialogue and pacing can be matched almost one-to-one with books and films from the past that it's trying to replicate. albeit in a short made-for-TV 22-minute format. Not only that, but the musical composition of this special is really good too. It does a good job balancing out the musical motifs that you might hear in an average episode of Garfield and Friends, while also having more than enough stings and cues that harken back to many a film noir. The story and mystery itself, I'd say, is serviceable. You got classic tropes like a bait and switch and a red herring, both of which I think are handled pretty well. I just wish that this was given a little more room to breathe, because by the time we hit the third act, it feels like it's rushing to the finish line. I also wish it was a bit funnier too. Like, there's some good bits here and there, but there's also a lot of moments where I think a joke or two would have worked really well. And I know what you're thinking. Well, don't worry, because he does indeed say, "Nice touch." It's actually kind of shocking that we got this special at all, given the circumstances behind it. You see, unlike a lot of other specials, Babes and Bullets is actually based on a pre-established book. Kind of. See, in 1984, Jim Davis wrote Garfield, His 9 Lives, a short stories book featuring different genres and art styles, and an absolutely bizarre, fucked up piece of fiction. Half of them aren't funny. They're just artsy, scary, and disturbing. Why did you do Garfield, His 9 Lives, Jim Davis? Anyways, one of the stories is actually the original Babes and Bullets. It's pretty one-to-one with the actual TV special. Until you look at the first picture.
I hate it.
Yeah, I can see why they didn't adapt this style for a full animated special. It's definitely something that works a lot better in print. Besides that jarring change, there's actually a few other minor differences. Despite the TV special being somewhat more adult-skewed, the original story doesn't even try to hide what it is. There's some minor changes, like utilizing scotch instead of milk at the end, but also, the mystery is revolved around a Greek Orthodox priest's death rather than a professor's. I can kinda see that probably getting changed in the transition, to avoid any religious controversy on such a big network. And finally, every character in the story is played by a cat, whereas in the TV special, Garfield is the only cat, with almost everyone else being human. In fact, the only other animal in the special is Odie, who makes a very brief appearance as a maintenance man. Not only is he not in the original story, but the maintenance man in the story wasn't even a dog. All of these changes, while seeming minor on paper, make all the world of difference when you're actually looking at these side by side. It's even weirder in the special when all of these somewhat realistically drawn female characters are so down bad for this 2-foot-tall orange tabby cat in a trench coat and a hat. Nah, okay, but see, the strangeness doesn't end there. See, Garfield His 9 Lives also received an animated adaptation about 6 months prior to the Babes and Bullets adaptation. Oddly enough, that story, along with 3 others, were not included in the special. I'm not sure why the Vikings and Exterminators were cut out, but if you've ever read Primal Self...
This is an actual picture from the book. Hey, nice to see you, Garfield. What's the matter? You a little agitated? About to commit murder?
Yeah, they probably made the right choice with that one. Unlike those other 3 stories, however, Babes and Bullets did get its own standalone special, albeit with a style more akin to the other Film Roman animated specials. And if that wasn't confusing enough, nearly every standalone Garfield special received a print adaptation released closely in conjunction with the TV special's release. And despite Babes and Bullets already being adapted from a story, it too received its own print adaptation that was released around the same time. And instead of following the style of the original story, this one is basically one-to-one with the TV special, from the dialogue to the art style. So now, we have 3 different adaptations of the story, including a weird Bizarro story that started it all, a loose animated TV adaptation, and a print adaptation of the TV adaptation that is not, in fact, in line with the original story. Most importantly, however, all 3 have the female characters having the hots for Garfield, so clearly their priorities were in order. We kinda got off topic here for a bit, but honestly, this is definitely a special that you should check out. It might not exactly scratch that Garfield itch, but if you're looking for a quick and fun mystery story, you can't go wrong with this.
Garfield, what are you doing in there?
Getting ready to roll the credits, pal.
I mean, at this point, it'd be more shocking if I didn't talk about American Dad in a video. Season 13 or 15, depending on who you're asking, because this show has always had weird seasonal discrepancies, has an episode called Death by Dinner Party.
What's the likelihood he even knows we're having a party?
And speaking of dinner parties, Francine, I'll see you tonight at yours. 416 Cherry Street, Langley Falls, 23655.
Francine is hosting a dinner party for friends and family, but things go awry when a mysterious dinner party killer starts picking off guests one by one. It could be anyone. Roger, Stan, Francine, Haley, Steve, Bullock, or it could even be series regular Colonel Withersby, who's been an integral part of the cast since the very beginning of the show. Right away, your mind is probably going to Clue, and I honestly couldn't blame you, since the opening title is very reminiscent of the Clue theme, and the Colonel is a dead ringer for one Colonel Mustard. But in actuality, it plays out similar to another slasher mystery film just 1 year later called April Fool's Day.
Paramount Pictures cordially invites you for a weekend getaway at the party to end all parties.
Not sure how many people have seen this movie, but for those who haven't, spoilers by the way, I mean this whole video is spoilers, but spoilers for this movie in particular. The plot synopsis boils down to a group of friends who are invited over to a mansion for spring break, and one by one, they're all killed off by an unknown assailant. It may sound similar to, I don't know, every other slasher B-movie you've heard of, but this one actually has a pretty clever yet controversial twist, where it turns out that everything that happened was fake, as the host for the weekend was trying to see if she could use the mansion for staged horror events, and every victim was in on it.
Ha 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 ha! That's really funny, you guys! Fuck you!
Where this ties back here is that this was all an elaborate ruse to teach Roger a lesson, who had tried to prank everyone at the beginning of the party by making them think that Jeff had been murdered. When Tuttle actually goes missing though, Roger comes clean and says that he's the one responsible for Jeff's disappearance. Turns out that everything was staged in order to try to get Roger to stop doing childish pranks, but when it comes to teaching Roger a lesson, as always, it backfires.
That's right. So now you know who did it. Do you want to know why?
This episode is fine. I know I went on and on about Simpsons and Garfield, and American Dad's more my forte, I don't think I need to tell you that. But I actually don't have a lot to say here. I've never really been a huge fan of the whole, this character we're seeing for the first time has actually been here the whole time trope that shows do sometimes, but it has some decent moments.
And that leaves Steve with the Colonel.
Oh yeah! Steve is gonna live! I'm going with the Colonel. Gonna be safe with the Colonel.
I like some of the gruesome ways in which the deaths are portrayed, but that's really it. When it comes to Seth MacFarlane Clue satires, this is easily the weaker of the two. But we'll get there soon enough. Adventure Time is no stranger when it comes to mystery episodes, whether it be the film noir-inspired B-Law Noir, or Candy Streets, which shares some similarities with Law and Order, or even the thriller of Root Beer Guy, the point being that there's a lot to choose from. For this video, I wanted to focus on one of the episodes that started this trend, Season 3's The Creeps. Now, technically speaking, this is a sequel to Season 2's Mystery Train, another episode that follows Finn and Jake trying to solve the murdery of What the hell's a murdery? What? What the fuck is a murdery? Another episode that follows Finn and Jake trying to solve a mystery of murdered passengers. This one even takes place on a train, and everyone knows that when it comes to mysteries, you can't go wrong with trains. However, while on paper that sounds like a great idea for a murder mystery episode, in execution, this one relies a bit heavier on gags, as well as setting up a red herring that turns out to be the true culprit anyways, but also is still kind of the red herring kind of? It's a little confusing, I mean it's still a fun episode, but whenever I think back to this episode, I never really think about the mystery aspect or even the dark ending with the train derailing, and instead I think to myself, oh, it's that one Adventure Time episode that uses SpongeBob production music.
SpongeBob to Krabs, come in Krabs.
Krabs here, go ahead.
Plankton just bought some baby clothes.
It's a receipt from an earlier train ride, from another train. Jake, I found a book. It's a dictionary.
Oh no, it's happening again.
In contrast, The Creeps is able to tell an engaging story that keeps the viewer on the edge of their seat, all while retaining that classic Adventure Time charm and writing.
I'm Cinnamon Bun.
What's the name on your invite?
Oh yeah, it's Guy Farting.
And it even thrives in the knowledge and rewards the viewers in knowing that it is indeed a sequel to the Mystery Train episode, with certain narrative beats and twists. As Adventure Time's first Halloween special, with the second one airing the week after, and coincidentally also being a sequel episode, this one to the very first one, The Creeps revels in taking the world of Adventure Time into more horrific places, while still retaining the TV PG rating, by leaving viewers in a state of unease as to the true culprit behind this charade, as well as taking place in a completely new, yet thematically appropriate location. We spend most of the 11-ish minutes doubting who could really be the one who invited this random assortment of people, and if it really is a trick, or if something more sinister is afoot. The night starts off relatively tame, with the supposed deaths of both Cinnamon Bun and BMO, giving you an idea that something else might be going on, as their departures, as I mentioned, are relatively tame, and Jake even points out that CB's skeleton is awfully similar to the one that he used during the events of the Mystery Train. However, things quickly derail when Finn is forced to come clean that this was all his doing, after a mysterious specter appears and seemingly kills off Bubblegum for real, melting her body in a rather horrific way. The immediate tonal shift here is kept in high stakes, with the surprisingly gruesome reveal of CB and BMO's demise, followed by the quick death of LSP, which was heavily foreshadowed with the framing of previous shots. With the seemingly true evil presence afoot, the remaining two try to flee, before Jake is taken away by the unknown specter. In the end, it turns out that it really was all a prank, with Jake figuring out Finn's plan to mess with him a while ago, and using that in turn to mess with Finn once again. At a glance, it's very similar to the previous mentioned Mystery Train episode, and even the American Dad episode we talked about, where everybody was in on it and no one was ever in any real harm. However, where The Creeps shines is in its ability to not have everything spelled out to you, and certain aspects are kept in the dark from both the characters and the viewers. When Finn is alone, he comes into contact with this monstrous creature that slightly resembles a girl. When questioning Jake about it, he denies it, stating that Finn's brain must have been playing tricks on him. For the time being, we never really get a full answer as to what actually happened to Finn, if it was all really in his head or if it actually happened. We're actually left in the dark for quite a bit, until Season 5's The Vault, but that's a story for a different day. Either way, The Creeps is able to attain a mysterious atmosphere for its entire 11-minute run, and as such, it's one of the best examples of the trope to date.
That one's going in the vault. And it's gone.
When Total Drama ventured into movie genres for its second season, it was only a matter of time before we got an episode revolving around mystery movies. Lo and behold, we finally did get that in the season's 20th episode, Get a Clue. First off, I have to give massive props to this episode for not only having a mystery aspect, as we'll get to a little later, but also devoting the first half to sleuthing and detective work. Right off the bat, the contestants are tasked with decoding a video message for clues to find Chris, and after that, they're tasked with receiving DNA samples and fingerprints from another contestant. We get this fun little montage of the other characters trying, and sometimes failing, to get what they need. The second half is devoted to the contestants, now on a train station set, finding the culprit behind Chris's supposed murder. Right off the bat, having a murder take place on a train, massive points in my book. I know it's cliche, but it's a good one at that. I also appreciate the dedication behind the challenge, with the contestants not actually thinking they're on a real train before Duncan confirms that yes, they are indeed on a real train and going very fast. And the character of Harold, who is an S-tier character by the way, has a lot of fun getting into it. He's easily the highlight of the episode and the mystery.
Why suspect Duncan? Any good detective knows 50% of the time, the husband or wife is whodunit. The other 50% of the time, it's the guy with the mohawk. He's the killer. I love this thing.
From there, however, things kind of take a dive in the mystery department. There's an overall arc throughout the episode of Lindsay trying to be heard and respected by the other contestants, and how Courtney keeps making that more and more difficult for her. That's kind of the central theme behind the mystery too, as when everyone else believes that Duncan is the killer, it's Lindsay who is able to find the decisive evidence and the true killer of the case, that being Courtney. Obviously no one actually killed Chris, otherwise the show would end abruptly. Instead, it's revealed that Chris staged the whole thing, and that Courtney was the intended contestant to be the killer, so that means Lindsay won the challenge. While this is great at defining Lindsay's character this season, and building up the rivalry between her and Courtney, something that reaches a tipping point when she gets her reward, the actual mystery kinda takes a back seat. That's not to say it's necessarily a bad thing, this is a satire of a reality show after all, so it makes more sense to focus on the competition and characters, and there's gonna be some cut corners to make sure that that's able to be pulled off. As is, it's a solid surface level type mystery that played out as it should have. Unfortunately for all my train enthusiasts, this is the last time we'll be talking about trains in this video at full, so I understand if you want to click off now.
It's one of Duncan's green hairs!
Where's that annoying music coming from?
When we come back, we'll put all the pieces together and wrap up our investigation. Yeah?
What? Who shot JR? Is that what this is? That's like 20 years ago. Is that the joke here? I am sick as a dog right now. I really don't have the time for this. I don't watch cartoons. I can give you a guess, and it's not going to be an educated one. The banana splits.
I went into the Fairly OddParents episode Where's Wanda with relatively low expectations. Not because I thought it was going to be bad or anything, I just never really gelled with the comedic styles of the show. Needless to say, I was actually quite shocked, not only with how well the episode held up, not only with how great the mystery aspect is, but also how funny the episode turned out to be.
Alright, nobody move!
I had forgotten how much real-world culture was embedded into the core of the show, so when the catalyst of the mystery behind the missing titular fairy was a parent-student classic movie night, I found myself shocked to see them actually referencing real-world films, like Jaws, Casablanca, Rocky, and Frankenstein. They even based the mystery aspect on Sam Spade's character in the Maltese Falcon. Of course, they couldn't get the rights to everything, but they got what really matters, with such classics as Night of the Twisters, Jurassic, and, of course, the very popular space opera phenomenon, Star Wars.
Blackmail's such an ugly word. I prefer extortion. The X makes it sound cool.
When the sleuthing actually begins, and Timmy wishes to be a detective like Sam Spade, the colors fade and the majority of the rest of the episode is black and white. At first, it seems like nothing more than a grayscale effect, but no, I'm genuinely impressed with the art direction in this episode. For an episode that's primarily in black and white, they're able to pull off some extremely strong shading in some of these shots. Not only in the art direction, but the music really impressed me too. Guy Moon's music is good, but it's a little too intrusive at points for my liking. But here, he's able to replicate this film noir-inspired composition, all while still feeling like something you'd hear in a Fairly OddParents episode. The mystery aspect here is pretty solid too. Or it would have been if they hadn't made it all but obvious who the culprit was at the very beginning of the episode. There's also a red herring with Timmy's dad that, while also equally obvious, I think they pulled off here really well. Other than that, my only real complaint is that the pacing is breakneck in this episode. That's all but to be expected from a show like the Fairly OddParents, and I really don't fault them here. But for me personally, I think this episode would have benefited from being a 22-minute special.
Sorry.
We don't get to the mystery aspect of this episode until about halfway through, and because of that, we barely spend any time with Timmy questioning the suspects, other than one or two quick gags. It was great seeing them in the setting of the movies they were showing off that night, especially Trixie with Casablanca, but I just wish there was a bit more time to each scene to really appreciate the satire. I mean, with something like Francis's scene, all we got from that is Rocky likes punching, which, I mean, technically that's correct, but there's more to it than that. Far be it from me to tell them how to write their episode, though, because what we got here is really solid, even with my nitpicks in mind.
Now will you hold me?
Oh.
Right!
In Jimmy Neutron's Season 1 episode, Crime Sheen Investigation, we see the main trio trying to solve the whereabouts of Sheen's missing Ultralord action figure. As is, instead of previous examples where it tries to emulate the style that the episode is parodying, this is more so just a standard Jimmy Neutron episode where a mystery is afoot. That being said, instead of going for a film noir episode with its references and choices of deduction, they instead decide to go into the direction of a classic Sherlock Holmes story, with Jimmy playing the titular Sherlock and Carl as his Watson. The episode focuses on the trio questioning 3 different witnesses, trying to figure out which one did the dirty crime.
She seems to be telling the truth, but just to be sure, Goddard, X-ray the suspect's clothes.
I can appreciate how, despite each suspect being innocent of the crime they committed, most of them at least considered or even outright tried to dispose of the action figure in different ways, all of which failed in the end. I can also appreciate how they don't just outright reveal the culprit until the end, and there's some relatively subtle hints as to who committed the crime sprinkled throughout the episode if you pay enough attention. And they're able to blend together Jimmy and Sherlock's different types of genius pretty well too, with Jimmy's more scientific approach, using technology like the Neutroscope to help out with the investigation, and Sherlock's more deductive approach. This comes through towards the end of the episode, where they've exhausted all their possible suspects, but Jimmy is able to pull through and reveal the true culprit through Sherlock's invaluable lesson: when you have eliminated all which is impossible, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It's not necessarily a breakthrough for this kind of satire, it's more so just an average Jimmy Neutron episode with a mystery coat of paint, and given how well the humor has aged in the show, an average episode of Jimmy Neutron is not the worst thing you can be.
A likely story? What would Dad possibly want with your rubber gloves?
Hey, boys! Look at me! I'm Cocky the Rooster Man! Cock-a-doodle-doo! Cock-a-doodle-doo! Hey, Mother Hen!
You know what? Funnily enough, I chose these episodes to be talked about in a mostly random order, but surprisingly, the Smiling Friends episode, Who Violently Murdered Simon S. Salty, shares a lot of similarities to Jimmy Neutron's take on it. When beloved fast food entrepreneur Simon S. Salty is murdered in his own restaurant, it's up to Pim and Charlie to uncover the true culprit.
It looks like we're technically in charge of solving this.
I guess that means we're detectives now, Charlie.
Did you really bring that with you into the movie theater?
Granted, they don't take the Sherlock and Watson approach that Jimmy Neutron took, but the similarities lie more so in how the episode plays out. The episode spends most of its time with the duo questioning the suspects, getting each one's alibis, and establishing a connection to the victim and possible motive. There's also the similarity of basically all the suspects being guilty, but whereas in Jimmy Neutron, where ruling out the impossibilities led to the true culprit, with Smiling Friends' approach, they decided to go with the tried and true cliche of nobody was the culprit, as the real killer behind Salty was his bad health. Although, technically speaking, all the mascots did try to kill him, but this is America. You can't get arrested for attempted murder if the person's already dead. Remember, kids, it's not a crime if there's no victim, and corpses can't talk.
All right, I guess that settles it.
Wait a second, I think that it's still going.
How many fucking people killed this guy?
I was gonna end it there, but I actually got my hands on the Smiling Friends Blu-ray for this video, and one of the included special features is creator commentary for all the episodes. So I decided to listen to the commentary for this episode, and there's actually some pretty interesting tidbits of information here. For starters, the intro video for Salty's Restaurant was actually transferred from a VHS, There weren't any filters or anything to get that effect. Something else worth noting is that there was originally going to be another suspect mascot, Nugget, who was going to be voiced by Lyle Rath. The character even got through the scripting phase, but due to being over time by 1 to 2 minutes, and also the fact that the Nugget shared a lot of similarities with the cup, they decided to cut him entirely. But to me, the most interesting thing, and the most relevant when it comes to the video topic, is how Michael and Zach approached the mystery aspect of this episode.
When we were writing this, we figured out what's something no one's ever done, which is a murder mystery where they all did it. And we looked it up, and I think it had been done about several other times. It wasn't a lot.
We were so proud of ourselves.
We were like, oh, you know what?
No one's ever thought about this
No one
before.
does it. It was like Knives Out, and then also Trained or whatever. We're like, fuck. So, but then we watched it, we're like, you know, we did it in a way.
This is the first cartoon version.
We did it better.
Surely.
Yeah. This is the first comedy.
This is at least the 8th or 9th cartoon version
and
of
also, we did it better because none of them did it. It was the grease that did it.
Mm-hmm. No one did the grease on the ground.
Yeah.
Needless to say, though, it's still a fun episode, and the twist here, while overdone, is done in a pretty comedic way that works well with Smiling Friends' tight dialogue and breakneck pacing.
Alright, next time I'm picking the food.
What do you think they did right after this? Do you think they went home?
I think they kissed.
You think they kissed?
Yeah.
Like in the
chaos? They just had a little
just like distress, just quick stress reliever.
Just a little
like,
quick little pick.
Okay, I needed that. Okay, I feel better. I feel better now. Yeah. I feel better now. Ooh, I needed that.
Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.
For a show that's been around as long as SpongeBob has, it's not surprising that they dipped into the mystery genre a few times. Granted, I'd say almost every single time, it's been a disappointment. There's an episode called The Patty Caper from Season 6 that's just okay, but that's not to be confused with The Great Patty Caper from Season 7, which, ironically, is much worse than The Patty Caper. Well, it took them 4 more seasons of the show, but they finally attempted another mystery episode in the form of Season 11's Squid Noir, and color me impressed, they managed to pull it off. That's really ironic on multiple levels, but we'll talk about that later. On the surface, it doesn't seem to be much different than a lot of other shows' attempts at mysteries that we've talked about before. Despite the similarities, though, I'd say that SpongeBob's attempt manages to trump both Jimmy's and Fairly OddParents due to all the little things that it manages to pull off. I could go on and on about how the visuals manage to pop despite being black and white. Like there's this one exterior shot of Squidward's house where the rainwater drips down from the windows and it looks like it's crying. I don't know why that goes so hard, but it does. The one thing that really gets me, though, the thing that puts it above those other shows, is the narration. I don't know how it took me this long to realize it, but Roger Bumpus is able to pull off the detective narration near flawlessly, even while saying the stupidest sounding lines.
It was a real knockdown, drag-out fight. Or it would have been if it hadn't been just 2 sad adults playing with toys.
In the end, it turns out that none of the suspects actually stole the clarinet, and that it was actually the jellyfish who took it, since they liked the sound of it so much. This wasn't subtly hinted at like with the squirrels and Jimmy Neutron, but nevertheless, I think it's a pretty good ending to a really solid mystery. Except they fucked it all up! Okay, so I didn't even need to do research for this part, because I vividly remember how this played out. When the episode first premiered in the US in 2017, it was airing during a week of new SpongeBob episodes, under the event moniker of You Bring the Color, in which you could go to a website which had screenshots from the opening title sequence that you could color in, which would then have the opportunity to be shown on TV during the premiere of one of the episodes that aired that week. The one exception to this, however, being Squid Noir. In addition to having the same stipulations with the title sequences as the other episodes, there were also screenshots from the actual episode that could be colored in too, and those also had a chance to be shown off during the episode. This was actually a pretty smart idea, given that for a majority of the episode, it's in black and white, so it makes sense for that to be applied here. And given that it's applied to the scene where the color returns is a great touch as well. Except that scene is also the scene that shows off that it was the jellyfish who stole the clarinet in the first place, making the whole mystery aspect moot. I remember when I went to the website back in 2017, and I was spoiled for this ending, just like all the other innocent children who tried with their parents' permission. Needless to say, I was completely appalled. I cannot believe they went and spoiled the ending to this inconsequential SpongeBob episode. My entire year is ruined! Oh, but at least Carter C. from Illinois got his colors on TV. That makes it all worth it!
And that's how it ended. Clarinet returned, case closed. Another mystery solved by Squidward Tentacles, Jazz Detective.
Man, I haven't watched The Mighty Bee in like over 10 years, yet I still vividly remember 10 Little Honeybees. I don't even know if it's my favorite episode or not, I just distinctly remember all the beats and how it played out, so I was really looking forward to looking at the episode again. I must have blocked the show from my brain for some reason or another, because it is crazy how weird the tone of the episode is. Like, not even in a good or bad way, I specifically remember it being a lot more fast-paced, but it's surprisingly slow, with scenes that sometimes drag out for a bit. In contrast, I thought I remembered this episode being funnier than it actually was, because some of the quote-unquote humor got kind of annoying at times. So in the episode in question, Bessie and her friends are invited over for Portia's 10th and a half birthday. And just after she blows out the candles on her massive birthday cake, like, can someone get this girl a stool? She's gonna break her toes! Portia's locket goes missing, so Bessie is on the case, trying to figure out exactly who done it, otherwise nobody will get any cake. It's kind of the same song and dance as the other episodes that we've talked about before, but there were a few things of interest to note. For starters, in a show all about how Bessie is trying to earn every honeybee badge to become the Mighty Bee, and so many other episodes are dedicated to that premise, and there's an actual Junior's Detective badge that's actually name-dropped in this episode, it's kind of strange that they instead went down the route of finding the missing item, something that's been done time and time again, and not even for the quest of a new badge. Something else worth noting, however, something that hasn't been done with other episodes where we've had one of the characters play detective and try to solve the mystery, she's really bad at it.
This narrows it down to everyone in this room. Bum bum bum.
Like, yeah, other characters have followed a wild goose chase before and suspected innocent people, but at least in the end, they find the true culprit. With Bessie, she's just way off at the very beginning, and it's a surprisingly entertaining watch. If you can't tell at this point, I'm really running out of things to say about how many of these episodes kind of follow the same song and dance, so I'm really hoping that the next one's a little more unique in its approach. Okay, so cards on the table, gonna be 100% honest here. I was short one show, and I had to decide between this and that one My Little Pony episode with Pinkie Pie and the train. So I decided to flip a coin to see which one I'd talk about. But then I realized I was contemplating whether to watch Unikitty or My Little Pony at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. So anyways, Unikitty had an episode called Who Took Toast, and it was really okay. It's a loud and obnoxious show, which is like fine. I mean, you can kind of tell from the offset, but it has some funny moments here and there. I really have nothing to say about this one, despite being so loud and energetic and colorful. It's probably the most by-the-books mystery episode we've looked at so far. There's a message somewhere here about being pressured by societal expectations to conform yourself to only your most popular attributes, never allowing you to change or expand your horizons. But it's through a sentient piece of toast, so it was a little lost on me. I just wish there was a Whodunnit episode where the effects are felt throughout the rest of the series, and it has long-lasting consequences that carry over to the rest of the show. But I gotta start being real with myself. For a cartoon to attempt something like that, being able to actually kill off characters, having a serious compelling story with actual tension and drama in an outstanding set piece that at the same time stays true to the core of the show and doesn't derive too much from the point where it doesn't feel like an actual episode of the show you're watching anymore. I mean, there's no show that's ballsy enough to do something like that. Ballsy. Hey, wait a minute! You guys have no idea how excited I am to talk about this one. And no, I'm not totally biased. Family Guy was in a very weird place at the turn of the decade back in 2010. It managed to become revived after its cancellation, and yet the tone between then and 2010 was definitely not the same as it was during its first 3 seasons. It was a lot more snappy, a lot faster paced, and definitely a lot meaner. And while the jump from standard definition 4:3 to high definition 16:9 didn't exactly mean that everything was going to change, it was sort of to be seen as this new era of the show. And so, when Season 9 debuted back in September of 2010, they decided to make it an all-out event with And Then There Were Fewer, one of, if not the best episode of the show, written by the GOAT, Cherry Chiva Pravadamarang. Oh my god! Cherry Chiva Pravadamarang. Yes, first try.
This was hard! I did this for you!
To give you a brief synopsis, the Griffin family are invited to a party in Peter's honor from a mysterious host at a mansion. However, when they arrive, they see that nearly everyone in town has received the same invitation, which confuses everyone. When they get settled, it's revealed that James Woods is the one who invited them, trying to make amends for those he's wronged.
Did the cork hit me?
But after the unfortunate death of one of the partygoers, the rest of the guests try to survive the night as they come to terms that one of them is a killer.
You just gotta stay calm.
With a killer in the house? Killer in the house.
First of all, I sound like a broken record at this point, I know, but it needs to be said. Good God, the atmosphere in this episode is so damn good. The mansion being this huge foreboding set piece with the lighting and shadows adding so much depth to all the scenes. We get to see so many different angles in this episode too. Like for their first HD episode, they're really experimenting with how much they can get away with. And for the most part, it pays off surprisingly well. The score too, it's phenomenal here. Walter Murphy really went all out, and it pays off surprisingly well in this episode. For as frantic and fast-paced as the show was around this time, there were a lot of quiet moments that really let you soak in the tension and appreciate the composition of his work. This episode also manages to somehow fit in nearly all the key players in the Family Guy cast, and they work really well as an ensemble cast here. No Cleveland though. Guess he was too busy raking in all the money bags he got from his show. It's great seeing all these characters interact, and there's a lot of great moments between characters that we'd never see otherwise. And honestly, anytime we get more Carl is always a good time.
She came into my life as if out of nowhere, enchanted me beyond my wildest dreams, and opened my eyes to the cleansing truth of Jesus Christ's love.
What does all this gay stuff have to do with us?
They got a killer lineup of guest voices too, including Drew Barrymore reprising her role as Jillian, who is always a pleasant addition to any episode.
Wonder if she's thinking about me.
I don't know, are you a pony or the color blue?
Derek, look!
How do you like that?
Oh, and also James Woods is back too, but he's James Woods, so we don't really need to talk about him. And instead, we could talk about Priscilla, voiced by Ashley Tisdale, who also does a great job in her role, albeit however short it is. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the best guest voice, Patrick Stewart as the cat. Truly, the episode would not be what it is today without him. But what really put this episode above everything else, something that no other show we've talked about has been able to pull off with their Whodunnit episode, is that this episode's consequences are felt throughout the rest of the show. Like, no joke, people actually die here and stay dead. They are not brought back. Well, except James Woods, but let's just pretend he stayed dead. This was a big deal. I remember seeing the promos at the time and them being like, people are gonna die. And I was just thinking, okay, sure, we've seen this before. They're gonna die. But in actuality, it'll all be like a dream, or they'll find some way to bring it back around to them being alive again. I mean, Family Guy pulled this stunt 3 years later with Brian.
Brian's dead!
Or at worst, they do something like that one Simpsons episode where they said someone was gonna die, And out of all the characters they listed, it was Krusty's dad, who appeared in like 3 episodes at the time, I think. So it was kind of like a non-loss. But no, they actually go through with the killing off of some pretty substantial characters. I mean, there are some cannon fodder characters like Priscilla and Stephanie, Quagmire's +1, who only show up in this episode and are killed off. Then there's some other characters who have appeared on a few occasions, but their absence wouldn't really be felt, like James Woods and Derek, Jillian's husband. That being said, Derek's death is important to highlight for something that we'll discuss a little later on. But then they pull out the big guns and kill off 2 characters that were, more or less, seen as somewhat series regulars, those being Muriel Goldman, whose presence isn't quite as strong as I made it out to be, but is still important enough of a character to mention, and Diane Simmons, easily the biggest character they killed off. And spoiler alert for the episode that I'm saying after I already went through all the deaths of the characters, she's the culprit. Diane being the killer might seem completely out of left field, but honestly, I think they do an amazing job with it here. They give her a strong motive to want to kill James Woods, as well as frame Tom Tucker for the murder, and her story at the end where she meticulously describes each and every aspect of the night from her point of view really puts you in the shoes of a woman who feels like she's lost it all. The mystery surrounding her as the killer might also seem like something that comes out of nowhere too, as all the explanation that we're given is just at the end of the episode, with nothing hinting at it beforehand, and I think that's a valid point. They do some pretty funny yet stupid things to make sure you're never really sure of who done it.
What are you doing up here? Wait a minute. What the hell is this? Oh my god. It's you! The man or woman who's been killing everybody!
However, if you pay close enough attention, you'll actually notice some key details that clue you in, such as Diane being missing from the drone-in shot of everyone arguing after Derek tries to get a better signal, or Diane being the first one to accuse someone, in this case Tom, after James Woods winds up dead. It's extremely subtle, so if you didn't notice it on your first watch, it's not a big deal. But for those rewatching, it's cool to see these sort of things pay off. And yet, despite all of this, despite how different the episode feels from all the previous and future episodes of the show, it still manages to feel like a Family Guy episode with its humor, which is more sparse in this episode, but they still manage to get a few good lines in here and there.
I don't know if that actually follows.
Oh, it does follow, Brian, because I'm the one with the giant magnifying glass. Is my eye big?
Yeah.
Good. Good. That means progress.
If there's one thing that I do have to dock points for, it would be one moment, and honestly, I would say most of you watching this probably have no idea what I'm going to be talking about, so let me just give you a bit of context. As with many TV series, the episodes that are broadcasted and streamed are not actually the full episodes. There are indeed a lot of scenes that are cut from said episodes, whether that be because of going over time or because of needing to cut it for censor reasons. And it's not like deleted scenes either, where they're not mixed properly or have unfinished audio. These are fully finished scenes that are cut. As of now, one of the only ways to watch episodes fully uncut is to watch it through a DVD release, something not uncommon for most TV shows. This episode is no different, as there were some scenes that were cut from the TV airing in Hulu. Editor's note, there's actually 3 versions of this. There's the short version for broadcast reruns, so they could air it on different networks. The full-length version aired for the broadcast premiere, and it's available on Hulu. And the extended version that's available on DVD only. And I keep saying that it's the DVD cut, but it's not the DVD cut. It's the Hulu and broadcast premiere cut. And I keep mixing them up. And I didn't realize that till later. And I already bought the DVDs, and now I'm sad because I didn't need to do that. And now I'm poor. Anyways, back to the video. This included an extended opening scene that had the Griffins driving to the mansion while a remix of the opening credits played, very reminiscent of the opening to The Shining. One of the cut moments, however, is a scene that I think is supposed to be played as a joke regarding Consuela, but it's shockingly unfunny, and there isn't even a punchline, so it's extremely hard to gauge, but nevertheless, it is a very out-of-taste moment in an otherwise really solid episode. And I'd honestly recommend the broadcast version over this one because of it. Editor's note, that's the end of me being confused for this section. Okay, thank you, bye, enjoy the rest, I'm still poor. One more thing worth mentioning is that, if you remember, I mentioned that Derek's death is actually somewhat important to highlight, and you're probably confused if you watch the broadcast rerun version of the episode. But you'd probably also be confused if you've watched the Hulu and broadcast premiere version as well.
Do you really think it could work, Derek?
There's only one way to find out.
I'll come with you.
No, it's too dangerous. Especially with Derek Jr. on the way. I know. It's a little early to announce it, but you're all friends. Except for one of you who's killing the rest of us, but everyone else is our friend.
Oh, congratulations, Jillian.
I know. I'm eating number 2 now.
Eating for two, honey.
They never actually bring this up again, however, so I'm not actually sure if this is canon or not. Yeah, let's hope it's not. Besides those minor things, this is easily one of the best examples of a whodunit in an animated format, and it's an episode that I revisit every year for Halloween. I cannot recommend this one enough if you are a fan of whodunit episodes and Family Guy as a whole, and I cannot think of a better way to close off this video.
She wants to see you. You want to see her. Nothing can ruin this night.
Okay, so this one is technically cheating, but honestly, I don't care. In 2022, Apple TV Plus released an 8-episode series called The After Party, created by one half of the team that can do no wrong, sometimes, Christopher Miller, with him and Phil Lord also being the EPs for the show. This is something that Miller had been planning since the early 2010s, and a decade later it finally came to fruition. And it's easily one of the best shows of the year. For context, the series follows Detective Danner, played by Tiffany Haddish, as she tries to piece together a series of events at an after-party for a high school reunion that leads to the death of one of their former classmates. How she goes about this is by questioning all the witnesses to put together the missing pieces, as well as build alibis and possible motives. So throughout these 8 episodes, we sort of see the same events unfold over and over again, which sounds like it might be cumbersome, but it all comes together in execution. Each episode is from the point of view of one of the characters, like Sam Richardson's Anique, Alana Glazer's Chelsea, and Ben Schwartz's Jasper, to name a few. Because of this, there's never really an unbiased or clear look as to how the series of events unfolds that night. For example, in one character's story, we could hear another character saying something to them that sounds threatening. However, when we get to the other character's story, we find out what they actually said, which makes sense in the context of the story being told, but also doesn't diminish what the first character said, given the context that unfolded during their story. We also get some scenes that unfold in certain stories that we don't see anywhere else, due to the person telling the story being the narrative anchor. But the best part, and the thing that really drives home the after party as a whole, is that each episode is a play on genres and tropes that keeps each story fresh and entertaining, all while falling in line with the characters' personalities and struggles. So the lovelorn Anique, who was hoping to reconnect with an old flame at the reunion, tells the story in the style of a rom-com. Meanwhile, the egocentric character of Brett, the ex-husband of Zoe, the aforementioned old flame, tells his story in the style of an action movie, where he does whatever he can to keep his family together, consisting of him, Zoe, and their daughter Maggie. The highlight for me is easily Jasper's story, which is in the style of a musical. Ben Schwartz is a fantastic singer, and he's able to pull off an extremely over-the-top hammy performance to a T, so any chance to get him to sing in such a big, boisterous way, it's always a good thing. And hey, for all the people who are still upset that I'm technically cheating by including a live-action show, it is worth noting that Zoe's story is completely animated.
What is that? What are they doing? Oh yeah, that's the face people make at us now. They don't know how to talk about the divorce, so instead they make this face with sad puppy dog eyes like we're a 5-year-old who just dropped her ice cream cone.
The animation for this episode was handled by Shadow Machine, who Lord and Miller had worked with for their Clone High reboot season. The animation style here is fantastic. The character designs are all unique, yet match their live-action counterparts surprisingly well. If this sort of design looks somewhat familiar to you, then you have a good eye, as these characters were designed by Lindsay Oliveris, who had served as a production designer for The Mitchells vs. the Machines. Comparing her art between the two projects, you can definitely see the resemblance. In regards to the actual mystery behind the show, I have to say, it is an extremely tightly written narrative. It's clear that Miller and the writers had everything planned out to a T with how the details are intricately woven into each and every person's story, as well as the narrative surrounding the rest of the night. Because of that, when the culprit is revealed at the end, it doesn't feel like a contrived or out-of-nowhere solution. It's a show where you can pinpoint who the killer is on your own, but you need to pay close attention to how everything plays out. It's clear they wanted to make a mystery that was solvable yet challenging, which is further shown by the background details in each of the episodes. You're not going to notice a lot of these in your first watch of the show because of how subtle they are, but in each episode, there's a hidden message that reveals innocent players in the game. But even then, you don't need to solve every little detail in order to know who done it, and even if you don't know, it's still an enjoyable time. The After Party released its second season in the summer of 2023, and I cannot wait to see what else this show has in store.
And with that, we're now back to this pretty little picture. Like a stoolie the day after the mafioso gets busted. Or a booze hound after being slipped a Mickey. In his last glass of that temptress of amber gold. My body lay lifeless on the cold wood floor. So who's the wise guy, or number who finally bumped me? Believe it or not, that chap in question, well, it was none other than me. Now don't get your underpants in a bunch. There's a perfect explanation. First of all, I ain't even a detective. I was going as McGruff the crime dog for Halloween. But it turns out that the fursuit gave me a nasty allergic reaction, which explains why I sound like a Gruff Newark guy. So I decided to modify the costume. And with just the additions of my mom's fedora, I now inspect a gadget. Oh, and I wasn't off. In fact, I'm not even knocked at the pearly gates. I'm just conked out. See, I was really happy with my on-the-fly thinking with this impromptu costume change that I decided to celebrate with an ice-cold drink. Unfortunately, I slipped up and tripped on my untied shoelaces, causing me to up and spill my beverage all over the ground. I know they say don't cry over spilled milk, but this was no ordinary dairy product on the ground. No, this was the Drink of Kings. Hubba Bubba bubblegum flavored soda for my personal collection. My last can too. And since they don't make these anymore, well, I guess I just got filled with so much rage that I just blacked out right on top of the mess. So while I'm happy I'm not lying in a pool of my own blood, you can call the deposit on my trench coat Hattie McDaniel, because it's gone with the wind. Sorry for stringing you along like that, pallies. I know it seems unfair that I just wasted all of your time for a joke that didn't even pay off. But it's like I said in the first place, life's a cruel mistress, ain't she?